And just a little insight into our agenda for today. We'll be doing speaker introductions right after this slide. We'll have an overview of EPA Brownfields Grants. We'll discuss proposal components. We'll talk about telling your story, data sources, how you can start getting ready now, and finally, how we can help you in that process. With that, I'll turn things over to Katie, who'll begin our speaker introductions.
Thank you so much, Haley. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to present this information to you. My name is Katie C. I am with Mid-Atlantic TAB, and we are the technical assistance to Brownfields provider for all of EPA Region 3, and that includes Pennsylvania. So welcome.
Hi, my name is John Gross. I'm the Pennsylvania DEP Brownfields Redevelopment Group Manager here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and run the group that helps to run the Brownfields Conference, which hopefully you all attended. I'm assuming you did since you are on this call. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Good morning. My name is Christian Smith. I'm a senior project officer here at the EPA. I've been here for almost 5 years. I am also the Pennsylvania state lead for the group and also the targeted brownfields assessment coordinator for the region.
Hi, everyone. I am Dawn Farver. I am also a Region 3 project officer. I've been here for about a year and a half. I'm the job training coordinator for EPA Region 3.
Okay, so I'm going to start this off by talking to you guys about our grant overview, give you an overview of our grant program, I'm sorry. So that's going to include things like the timeline, eligibility, our grant types, what's included in our proposals, and then a little overview of grants in SAM.gov. Next slide. So this is a depiction of our FY27 grant timeline, but please note that this is subject to change. So this is what a typical grant competition will look like. Typically in November, we'll publish a notice of funding opportunities, and this gives you the criterias and explains everything that you need to include in your application. Typically, applications are due in November. Again, these are subject to change. This past year, we obviously had the government shutdown during November, so we pushed back the submission deadline to January. Then once we get the submissions, there's several rounds of reviews that we go through. There's a threshold review, there's a programmatic capability, and a merit review. So that'll take us a couple months to get through. Typically, we have from November to May to do our reviews. We have a panel discussion where we sit down, we have multiple reviewers look at every application, and we sit down and we discuss it to kind of flush out the fine details, make sure that everyone understands what's in the application. And then typically in May, we'll announce our who was selected for an award. Once we make these selections, you'll get assigned a project officer from the region, and we'll reach out. We'll start working with you to finalize your application documents to make sure it's ready for award. And then come October, your October 1st is when your award will actually be sent out. So please note that this is actually a full year from when you apply for the grant. So it does take a little bit of time. So you should take that in consideration when you're applying. And then after that, you're off to the races. Your project officer will be reaching out. They'll set up a kickoff meeting, and then you can get started with your grant activities. Next slide. So eligibility, who's eligible to apply for grants are state and local tribal governments, general purpose units of local government, regional councils, redevelopment agencies, quasi-governmental agencies, and nonprofit agencies. Typically, we're looking for some sort of like community-based organization where there's going to be some sort of public benefit. We're not awarding grants to private citizens, for-profit companies and industries. So again, we're not trying to give awards to responsible parties either. So again, these are some of the eligible entities. These will all be posted in the notice of funding opportunity as well. So I think on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the nonprofits. So again, eligibility reminders, regional councils are established under government authorities. General purpose units of government are also established under federal and state and local law, and they function as a single legal entity. So they're eligible for our grants. Land banks are also eligible in certain circumstances as lead members for assessment coalitions, but it depends upon how the land bank was created. So please reach out to your projects officer. This is doable, but reach out beforehand so we can just make sure we get everything straightened out for you. Nonprofits, there's always a few little quirks to them. For example, your 501c6 organizations can only apply for cleanup grants. They're not eligible for your assessment grants. And then any 501c for nonprofit that lobbies the federal government are not eligible for our Brownfields grants. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so for fiscal year 27, we don't have all of the predicted data for our upcoming grant cycle. So these next couple slides are going to show what we've had from this past cycle. It's going to be pretty similar. I'll point out where there are some differences. It's subject to change, but for example, this will show you what you're eligible to apply for. If you want to apply for multiple different grants, this chart is where you would come. So you would start here with this first column where it says I'm applying for. You scroll down till you find what grant you want to apply for. And then once you do that, you'll go left to right and it'll show you what other grants you can apply for. So for example, if you go to a multi-purpose grant, you're not going to be eligible to apply for any other grant type. But let's say you apply for a cleanup grant down there on the bottom, well, then you're also going to be eligible to apply for assessment grants at the same time. That's your community-wide assessment grants for states and tribe, your community-wide assessment grant, or your coalition assessment grant. So if you submit multiple applications, you'll probably get contacted by your local EPA region just asking, hey, you can only submit one application unless you line up with this chart where it says you can submit multiple. So take a look at that if you're interested in multiple or applying for multiple different grants at once. And then similarly on the next slide, if you already have a grant and you're thinking about applying for another grant, if we could go to the next slide, please. This will show you, if you have an existing grant, what you're eligible to apply for. So you can see on this slide, there's a lot more green bubbles that say, yes, you can apply for another grant. So we want you to continue doing good. If you're a successful applicant, we want to see, repeats. So there's a lot more opportunities that are available. I will point out that for several of these yellow ones, if you have an existing grant, a lot of times we want to see that you've made significant progress. That's usually around a 70% drawdown. This sometimes changes throughout the years, but it's usually around 70% drawdown. We don't want people that just applied for a grant last year, haven't had any drawdown, and now they're applying for another, $500,000 or something like that. So as long as you're being productive, you can be eligible for additional grants. And again, these are all based on fiscal year 26. We will publish updated figures and tables, but at this time, it's a little too early. We're still in the review process from last year. So look for an updated table here coming in the next couple months. Next slide, please. So this shows the funding that was available this past cycle. Again, we don't have the predictions for this next upcoming cycle, but this goes to show you the infrastructure law funds are no longer going to be offered. This last cycle, FY26 was the last offering of that. So you can see here where the big X was, that was all the infrastructure funds. We're not going to have that in FY27. And we don't know exactly, but we're expecting that our regular appropriations is going to be around $60 million, as you can see in that last column. And that'll be split up between not just the assessment coalitions, that'll be split up between your community-wide, the coalitions, the cleanup grants. Special note, multi-purpose are offered every other year. They flip-flop with our revolving loan fund. So in fiscal year 27, we're going to offer the RLF grant instead of the multi-purpose. And again, all these figures are subject to change. We put out an estimate of how many awards we think we can make and the max dollar amount that we can award. but not everyone requests the same amount. So for example, if we received, 40 applications for $500,000 multi-purpose grants, then based upon last year's numbers, we might have been able to fund all of them. So it all just depends upon what, each applicant is asking for, and that'll determine how many awards we can give out. And I should also note that this number is for the nationwide, so it's not specific to just Region 3. So again, that $60 million is going to be stretched across all of our different brownfields grants across the entire nation. So there is going to be less awards in the future here. So just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. And another big thing that's coming back is our match requirement. So with the infrastructure law funding, we were able to waive the cost share requirement. However, since the funds ran out last year and we're back to our regular appropriations, that cost share is coming back. So where this comes into play is with your cleanup, RLF, and multi-purpose grants. Your cleanup and RLF grants are going to require a 20% cost share. So if you're requesting $100,000, you're going to have to pony up $20,000 of your own money to be able to apply and be eligible for this grant. Multi-purpose grants are a little bit different because they also do assessment work under that grant. The entire grant isn't devoted to just the cleanup, and that's why multi-purpose get a flat $40,000 cost share. So there is some benefits to that. And then one other important thing that we always like to highlight is the cost share match doesn't have to be a monetary match. You can donate like in-kind staff hours to make up, that $20,000 or whatever it is. But please just don't inflate your prices. We don't want to see like, hey, we're going to put in, 1 hour of personnel time for 20 grand per hour or something like that. Make sure it's reasonable, make sure you use your normal rate, and that is perfectly acceptable. If you don't want to put up, if you're a smaller community, you don't have that additional funds, that's totally fine. If you want to donate in-kind hours or something, labor, material, services, that's perfectly acceptable as well. Next slide. I think I'm going to turn it over now to Dawn, who's going to talk about the specific grant types that we have.
Thanks, Christian. Yes, so I'm going to take over and tell you about the different types of grants that are available for applicants. So as Christian said, this round we're going to do the revolving loan fund grants, the assessment grants, and cleanup grants. So we will not be doing multi-purpose this next round in fiscal year 27, but I'm going to tell you about all of these opportunities anyway. So assessment grants can be applied for. It's grant funding that is for sites with known or potential contamination. And we have multiple eligible grant activities. So under assessment grants, you can also do some planning activities. It's not just due diligence, phase 1, phase 2 type work. We do like to see that you're doing phase 1 and phase 2 type work because it is an assessment grant, but there are also other things that you can do related to planning that can support that grant. So for example, as some of these that are listed, you can do a brownfields inventory using that funding. So in your community, you can identify what brownfield sites exist in your community and help to prioritize those for assessment. Obviously the characterization, so those phase 1, phase 2 type activities. Area-wide and site-specific cleanup and redevelopment planning. So what do you plan to do with these brownfield sites? Helping to, again, identify which brownfield sites you might want to prioritize. What types of reuse would you like to see for some of those brownfield sites, or would the community like to see? Tying into community involvement, how are you going to inform and engage stakeholders in the process so that your community is involved and can provide feedback on what the plans are so they feel like they can be supportive of your activities? They're also eligible for travel and training. So attending the state brownfields conference like the Pennsylvania conference or attending the national conference, those are also eligible expenses under assessment grants. Next slide, please. Next up, cleanup grants. So these are what they sound like, applying for a grant to help actually clean up and remediate a site. It can be at one or more brownfield sites. It doesn't just have to be one. You will have to make sure that you're providing information for every site that you're planning to clean up. So it'll take a little bit more time for the application, but you can do multiple sites. It's not just one. An eligible entity, so whoever's applying for the grant must own the site at the time of application and be the sole owner of that property. So make sure that you review that information if you're not sure. So at the time that grant application goes in, you have to be the sole owner at that point. Cleanup activities don't only include cleaning up the site, but planning for the cleanup, making sure the community is involved. That's going to be required. So what those plans are, doing the final analysis of brownfield cleanup alternatives or the ABCA, doing the actual remediation itself, and development of any engineering or institutional controls that may be required so that that site can get closed out, maintaining administrative records, and then of course the cleanup completion report or letter. Again, that note, the applicant must own the property as be the sole owner at the time of that application submission. Next slide, please. So revolving loan funds are not going to be offered, they are going to be offered in this round of funding. In that case, that can provide funding to capitalize a revolving loan fund that provides loans and sub-grants to carry out cleanup of brownfield sites. This is generally going to be more applicable for a larger organization, a city, because it does involve a lot of financial things that are a little bit different from some of our other grants. But if you apply and receive a revolving loan fund, that can be used then by you as that entity to provide no interest or low interest loans for eligible brownfield cleanups, sub-grants for cleanups, and other eligible programmatic costs. So for example, let's say you're a county, you apply for a revolving loan fund grant, that would then allow you to give grants to other like members of your community, municipalities to do brownfields work. You can apply as an individual entity or part of a coalition. So again, I was saying like kind of larger organizations, but it could be multiple communities that apply together. Subgrants to those entities that you would give the grants to are typically limited to $500,000 per site. Again, this is a little more complicated. We do have some technical assistance providers that can provide help for this. Grow America is currently our essentially tab provider related to RLF specifically. If you're considering applying for an RLF grant, please reach out to EPA, to our project officers. We can help answer questions. We can also get you in touch with the right people if this is something that you're interested in doing. Okay, next slide, please. So we're not talking about multi-purpose grants for this round because again, we're talking about this fiscal year 27 coming up. But I am going to put in a plug for job training grants since I'm the job training coordinator for Region 3. Job training grants are on a little bit different cycle than our MARC grant cycle. We will have a notice of funding opportunities for job training grants coming out here probably within the next month or two. So again, a little bit different, but I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that this existed. And if you have questions, you can always let me know. The job training grants provide funding for eligible entities to recruit, train, and place unemployed and underemployed residents into environmental careers. So what we're looking for is we know that we have communities out there that have a lot of brownfield sites. What we'd love to do is be able to have people within those communities actually be able to contribute to cleaning up those sites and making their community safer and healthier. So we want to make sure that those people have that opportunity and we can build local workforce capacity. So what can be funded under these grants? The instructors to teach courses, training materials for students, licensing and testing fees for students. We love for students to come out with multiple certifications that make them more marketable in the environmental space. Work gear, drug testing, health exams is required to screen applicants for your program. Job placement, employer outreach, so that you're connecting with employers and helping your students find those positions. It's also eligible to use some participant support costs. So again, we're targeting under and unemployed people in a community. We recognize that there can be some hurdles to attending a training program. So things like supporting childcare where it's eligible. Sometimes they can provide stipends for students to give them another incentive to say like, okay, you're doing this training and it's free for you, but we recognize you still have to pay bills and things. Sometimes transportation costs. So you can use grant funding for bus passes, for example, to help students be able to attend all of the training. Regarding what training can be provided, we require all of the students who are enrolled in your program to take the 40-hour OSHA HAZWOPER training, so hazardous waste operations and emergency response. So that's the minimum certification that they need to make sure that they take. Everyone has to take that. But then also other additional training courses related to site assessment and remediation, how to involve communities in cleanup issues, environmental health and safety, how to make sure that you're safe on a hazardous site, and also doing brownfields inventories. And that's just a really, really short list. So when that notice of funding opportunities comes out, we have a lot more details there. Let us know if you have questions. We have all kinds of websites and links, and you can reach out to me directly if you're considering applying for a job training grant or want to learn more. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to hand this off now to John Gross with Pennsylvania DEP to talk about proposal components.
I should turn on my audio first before I start talking. Good morning, everybody. And there's a lot of words on these slides, and I don't know if we discussed this, but we are going to share these slides with everybody here on the call. So rather than me kind of going through all of the individual stuff here, we can kind of read through it and go through the details of what's going on. But just the idea of this is kind of where we're putting everything together, talking about proposal, and then we'll move into the threshold stuff. But this is generally where everything falls apart at some point for folks that end up not getting selected. EPA gives a very structured what they call a NOFO, notice of funding opportunities. Oh my gosh, I can't even say it. We always just say NOFO because it's just easier to say. But the general thought here is that EPA gives you that structure so that you can go through and answer everything kind of as it needs to be answered. The narrative information is a 3-page limit, single spaced, and you have to answer each one of those individual questions. You can't really fake it through this. You kind of have to, know what your narrative is. And they basically really only score what they're asking for. So one of the suggestions as we were kind of talking through this is make yourself an outline as you walk through this whole thing, and generally kind of make sure that you have all the questions answered, so that then you can fill in your details and go through, make sure that you have everything kind of covered. Again, I read this note at the bottom. EPA only evaluates the information that is requested and required in the NOFO. To that end, if you don't answer all those questions, you're pretty much automatically, kind of rescinded, and you'll be notified. At that point, we'll move to the next slide. And we'll kind of get into some of the threshold criteria. Obviously, just kind of walking through some of these, you have to be an eligible entity, which we talked about. I think Dawn talked about each one of those kind of as depending on what you're applying for. Each one of those you have to be an eligible entity for. The proposed tasks have to be eligible. That, generally speaking, as Dawn mentioned before, you have some options within the assessment grants. You can do some planning and do some other stuff, but it has to be eligible for the grant that you're applying for. Contractors are there if you've already figured out what those contractors are. Subrecipients, they also have to be eligible for those sub rewards for the same criteria. And existing grant holders must have diverse 70% of the grant funds. So if you're a previous holder, you have to get rid of 70% of those funds before you can apply for another one. If you haven't met that, you're obviously going to be disqualified. And then for the cleanup and multi-purpose grants, the application, again, I think Dawn already mentioned this, but have to be a sole owner of the property. Have to meet the EPA definition of a brownfield, and the phase 2 assessment must have been completed. So I think that's all for that one. Let's move to the next one. And we'll talk a little bit about the threshold criteria. And this is kind of the gatekeeper, pass, fail, and there's no partial credit. You either do it or you don't do it. So let's move on to kind of the details of the threshold stuff. This is where your discipline in writing really kind of matters. And don't do don't do this at the last moment. This is one of those situations where you want to write this, give yourself enough time for internal review, give enough time for as Mid-Atlantic Tab is going to tell you later, for Mid-Atlantic Tab to review it. Make sure that you have your checklist kind of verified and everything that's happening. Double check your work is, in big bold print for a reason. Make sure that you've answered all the questions, and don't rush and try to do this on submission day, because guaranteed you will end up having an issue, and you can't log in or something's happening, and you will regret doing that. I think I hit most of the points on here. So make sure you're hitting all the threshold criteria in the NOFO. It's pretty simple. They ask you a bunch of questions. You answer all those questions, and then you fill in the details when you can. Again, it's very detailed, very constrictive as far as what EPA is looking for, but they want those questions answered, and that's what you're going to be judged on at that point. So, okay, let's move to the next slide. Talking about the assessment grant and cleanup grant here, we'll start with the assessment grant. Letter from a state agency. That's us. I think Jim is also on this call. Jim is the one that prepares those. Mike, my boss, who is the program manager, actually signs those. So at this point, you just basically have to have an acknowledgement letter that that says the state supports you, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. The cleanup, as far as the cleanup grant, I'm sorry, the letter from previous, you can't use last year's letter for this year's grant, but it's really, we can use the same letter generally speaking, but we'll have to redo it and get a new signature on it and make it and refresh it with a new date. Generally speaking, I don't think EPA is real critical about what the letter says. It's basically just saying that the state supports it. Cleanup grant, the letter has to be a little bit different, and that means at this point there has to be some site characterization done, or at least sufficient level done now currently, or that it will be performed prior to typically June, but in previous years. But before you're going to get the grant money, generally you have to have that assessment done and statement confirming that you're going to have sufficient characterization completed by that. Whatever, and again, it says DVD in here, but yeah, at some point there's going to be a date in there that will say this is you need to have this phase 2 completed by then. And generally speaking, I think that's about it. That's something we'll work with you and the regional staff with. Generally, at some point, especially in Pennsylvania, a lot of these sites are already in the Act 2 program. And once they're in the Act 2 program, generally, once you've done your cleanup plan and remedial investigation report, most of the time that's sufficient enough for us to say, yes, you've completed this, or that you will be completed at this point in time. But we'll work with you on that to make sure that that's kind of where we're at, and making sure that your progress is sufficient. All right, I think next slide now. All right, so let's talk about cleanup grants and ownership eligibility. So generally speaking, the eligibility requirement for a cleanup grant is that you must own the site at the time of application submission, not when you're going to get the money, not later on. I think we're going to buy this. It's got to be specific, and it's got to be basically done before you send that application in. And generally speaking, you have to have conducted all those appropriate AI prior to acquiring the property. Generally speaking, phase 1 has to have been done, and more than 100. If it's done more than 180 days prior to, get a refreshed one. Make sure that you have a new one, so that when you get this property in your hands, that you are eligible then for money. This is something that trips up a lot of people. There was phase 1 done, 3 years ago, and we acquired this property, and then you find out that you no longer are available to get funding because you did not have a phase 1 site assessment done within that 180 days prior to acquiring the property. So that's about it for that slide. We'll move to the next one. And here, so for cleanup grants, there is a community notification requirement, which I don't know if we mentioned that before, but Generally speaking, ad in the local newspaper or equivalent generally means that, a lot of, Act Two has the same requirements for some of their stuff too. Generally speaking, one of the questions that came up at the conference, I think in one of the sessions was, what do you do for a something that needs a newspaper requirement and the local area doesn't have a newspaper? So generally, equivalent means, if there's an online newspaper, something like that, we in fact, an EPA can verify that as well. Generally speaking, though, there is a caveat that local newspaper basically means you need to try to get this out in front of the public prior to you prior to you sending in your application. But this notification must have a few things in it: the copy of the grant application, including draft APCAs, available for public review and comment. How to comment on, basically how to comment on the draft application. If there's there's a way somebody wants to comment, you have to supply a reason and a way to do that. Where's the draft located? Who has it? With what website it's on? Blah blah blah. And then if there's the date and time of the location of the public meeting. And I think public meeting, generally speaking, an EPA again can verify this, but that can be an online meeting. But I'm not sure. Just make sure that when somebody from EPA gets back on that's true. I think that's it for that one. And next slide. And then we'll get into more of the public meeting piece. Oh, never mind. It's on here. I forgot. So your public meetings discuss this, discussing the application, making sure that you're considering all the public comments, generally going through, anything that came up. I mean, I don't think a lot of public comments come up, depending on the kind of controversial piece of this site. Generally speaking, when you're applying for a cleanup grant, you may have already done this, for other public meeting stuff that you've had kind of for site use and blah, blah, blah. But, in that it is in person or virtual. I forgot this was on here, so my bad. But then basically the required attachments then for the grant application, when obviously the public meeting's done, now you're doing this. So you have to make sure that you've got a copy of that newspaper or online advertisement. The comments, anything that came in, the answer to the comments, the response to the comments, and then any meeting notes from that public meeting have to be included, and then the sign-in sheets or participation list to make sure that everybody that was there in attendance, making sure that everybody knows who was there and what was going on. Okay, I think that's it for that one. So let's next slide. So then we'll move on to the State Environmental Authority letter. This is what we talked about a little bit earlier. It is required for all the grant applications. It's a very simple thing, generally a request from us. Most of the time, we're not going to tell you that you can't, that we don't support you for you getting funding. We're generally going to tell you yes. Now we get into the cleanup grant piece. If you're not there, or you're not the owner of the property, or we find that you haven't done sufficient characterization, that may end up causing an issue, and we may have to, within that letter, say that you have not completed this and you may not be eligible. At that point, obviously that's not a good thing. You want to make sure that you've met those criteria. But then as far as the current year, it's got to be current year. People have tried to do that in the past, and they'll get flagged. Now, I will say this: if we've had this happen before, somebody submits the grant and forgot about the state letter, EPA will give you a couple of minutes to make sure that you get that letter. Give us a call. It happened this year with somebody, and they were a little bit behind in getting everything together and forgot about the state letter. EPA will generally give us a little grace period and say, "Hey, can you get that letter in?" And we will do that. But yeah, generally speaking, we like to have at least 2 weeks to make sure that we get that letter back to you. It doesn't take that long, but typically, depending on who's here, who's not here, and all that kind of good stuff, we like to have a little bit of time. So I think that's it for me. So I think Katie is going to start telling you how to tell your story when it comes to writing the grant.
Thanks, John. Good job. All right, so yep, it's me again, Katie, and I'm going to tell you about telling the story within your grant application. Okay, so it's very important that you distinguish your grant application. And so you want to make sure you're thinking about what can set your application apart from the rest. So all applications all good applications should talk about jobs lost. So if your community has experienced this loss of jobs due to business and industry closures, you want to talk about that. Disasters that have occurred, whether that's significant flooding or wildfires. Well, that's not as big of an issue, thankfully, in Region 3, but you want to focus on these particular issues that have been a struggle for your community. The reduced tax base as a result of closing industry and the reduced population. So when you hear these things in a bullet list, it just, it reads kind of dull, right? But if you're really going to talk about setting your application apart, you need to really emphasize why it's so important and unique in your community and how has that struggle been an exceptional challenge for your community. And many applications talk about the desire to transform into a new economy. So if it's an example of a coal community where the coal is no longer, the main source of industry, and the community is looking to change that, that's what you want to talk about. How might this grant application help get you there and help turn things around? If there's a need for some quality housing, and that's affordable housing, and maybe that's affordable housing, maybe it's for your senior population. Is that going to be focused in the downtown area, which also needs to be revitalized? You want to talk about that. And also talk about how this grant can get you to a better spot to attract new businesses. Wanting to talk about bringing businesses into your neighborhood. And again, how can you really set your community apart and make it more attractive to ultimately bring those economic development opportunities? Next slide, please. More about how to set your application apart from the rest. Questions to make sure you address are: what is different, unique, and interesting about your particular community or your region that you are focusing on? And also, what's different and unique about your specific applications? You need to be writing this with the thought that how can I make mine be how can I make my application stand apart to the best of my ability? This is your one shot, your one opportunity, and you want those readers to be able to take a look at that and go, oh my goodness, this is incredibly compelling. I understand the challenges and I understand the goals that they want to ultimately work toward within the community. So when we focus again more on unique and different things about your community, you want to focus on history, geographic setting, big ideas for your future, and any critical needs that you have. We're going to talk about this a little more, but those reviewing your application are most likely not familiar at all with your area. And so when we talk about focusing on the history, that's where you can talk about why this particular industry was incredibly important in the area, and then what changed, why it is not, and are there any challenges that the geographic setting of your area pose as well. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways, again, is to think about, again, who is reading and ultimately scoring your application and therefore reviewing your story. Chances are they are most likely not familiar with Pennsylvania very well or your particular community, because these are going to be reviewed by EPA folks across the country. So, we're here in West Virginia with a lot of small communities, small rural communities. And, quite honestly, I'm from West Virginia and I'm learning about new communities, new small communities all the time. I didn't realize that was a community. And therefore, I'm not familiar with the history and the challenges and understanding what can ultimately help that community improve. Let's see. So the application needs to tell the reader, we say, about the real Pennsylvania. So, it's easy to think about some of the key things we know about, right? some agriculture, the coal history. These are some things that are in a broader context, but what's it really like in your community or that region that you're looking to focus on? This is where you need to pull out those unique details about, again, the area and the specific project. So ultimately, of course, if you're looking at an assessment grant and you're focusing on those target areas, what's unique? What's different about those areas? And then if you're looking to apply for a cleanup grant, why? Why should they be compelled to fund the cleanup for this particular project that you need to clean up in order to ultimately redevelop? Why could you not make this happen without the EPA Brownfield Cleanup Grant? So remember, this is a national competition. It's very competitive, and your application, again, is going into a mix with applications from all across the country, and you need to be authentic. This should read, again, to be a very compelling application, so that those reviewing it, as long as it's written well, and again, grabs their attention for why, again, why they would, why they wouldn't choose it. That's what you're going for. So be authentic and make sure you're choosing an opportunity to stand out. Okay, sorry, I was checking Dawn's notes. Next slide, please. Okay, so hopefully I've hammered on that a little bit. Now we want to talk about some data sources. I only have one slide here. It was a little bit challenging this last time around when it came to finding data sources for your grant application. Data is incredibly important. I know when we have reviewed some grant applications, we have provided information that says not enough data. You really need to cite the data and let that data, again, back up why this information is so important, and how you cannot argue with what the data is showing. So some data that examples that you can pull from include the U.S. Census, and that's going to give you some demographic population information, public health information, because within the grant application you have the opportunity to talk about some public health struggles that may be unique for the area. Is there a higher concentration of cancer or heart issues? So that's where you can find information to build that case. Community health rankings. And I should mention the fact that they are blue means that they are a hyperlink. So when you get this slide deck after the webinar, you're going to be able to click on that. CDC places, another opportunity to take a look at that and understand the distribution of health measures, and then also the National Risk Index. Again, these are just some ways that are still good, viable options to help you as you're, again, building that solid case with the data. Next slide, please. Where to start? Okay. So here we are talking to you on April 10th about getting ready for your grant application, and the NOFO hasn't even been announced yet. I am a planner by trade, city planner by trade here, and so, I'm usually screaming about, please don't wait until the last minute. I also say that to my children, oddly enough. So please start now. I know I heard John talk about this a little bit earlier, but things you can start doing now include sam.gov and grants.gov. Please, please, please do not put that off until the last minute. Those are very rigid websites, and those are beyond the control of the EPA or a TAP. We can help you with this information, but if something is stuck or something needs to be figured out, this is not going to be a quick turnaround. So do not take for granted that it is set up. Just because someone in your organization has an account, does not mean that you're good to go. You need to check into that to see who is that person. Are they in fact getting the information based on the contact information that's in there? Is it up to date? Are there any outstanding issues that you need to take care of there? Please go ahead and check on that. You do have to renew that every year, so every 12 months. I don't know when that 12 months ends for your organization if you already have that set up, but please go ahead and get familiar with that. And also take a look at grants.gov. Grants.gov, similar situation. You need to be looking at that in advance, because that is where you upload your application. And if there are issues and you end up actually submitting your application on that actual final day that can prevent you from being able to apply. And we absolutely don't want to see all that hard work stalled because, again, of something that you could be working on now. So I hope I've conveyed that well enough to say that it is incredibly important. Of course, this says if you're not sure about it, ask Carrie. For those of you thinking, who's Carrie? Carrie is our director. She is not here today. She's on vacation, but you can reach out to Tab and talk to Carrie. She has made it her personal mission to make sure that everyone is as comfortable as they are in their SAM.gov and grants.gov accounts, and they feel ready to go. Community engagement. Are the appropriate partners identified and are those roles established? So it's incredibly important to make sure that you are having meaningful community engagement. We're talking about things that take you beyond your basic planning commission or city council meeting. We're talking about ways to bring the community together so that they feel that their opinion does matter, because it does. So have you thought about some creative ways to solicit input for your particular project? And again, think about these partners who actually are active stakeholders within the community, and that should go beyond government entities. It should be looking at local nonprofit organizations, maybe Rotary Club, church organizations. Look at who is in your particular neighborhood that you need to be bringing to the table and including. Project cost estimates, they must be accurate, detailed, and reasonable. This is not shoot from the hip, give your best estimate. This needs to be grounded in some pretty recent information about the general cost. So when you're looking for your cleanup application and you need to know what's the going rate, what might this cost to actually bring this cleanup application, this cleanup project to fruition, again, you need to have some solid estimates that are, again, pretty accurate. So please go ahead and make sure you've got a good contact who can help you prepare those estimates. And then for assessment grant applications, have you identified the target area? That goes back again to telling your story. Your story should be compelling. It should be distinguished. Again, why is this the area that you're focusing on? You could focus on, if you're a bigger city, there are a lot of neighborhoods that you could focus on. Why is it this particular area that you're focusing on? And have those sites been prioritized? So that's what you should be making sure that you include in your assessment grant. And these are things that you can be doing now, and we are available to help you with that. Next slide. If you're looking to apply for a coalition assessment grant application, so that is when it's a team of entities who are looking to apply, have you identified the lead applicant? So you could go ahead and start working on that relationship and start to understand how you can work together. So definitely a good time to do that. And then you could start taking those next steps a little bit closer and to the NOFO and then after it's open. And you also need to make sure that the coalition partners are eligible. I know we've got some information on that, so we'd be happy to help point you in the direction. And you can, again, make sure that's good to go. And you would not want that to be a holdup later once the NOFO guidelines are released and you're ready to get to the finish line of submittal. So please know that information ahead of time. When it comes to assessment grants, you want to know if the sufficient assessment work has been completed to determine your cleanup plan and the costs. So again, when you want to make friends with John and Jim at the DEP, so make sure that, again, that you're speaking with them and they can help you with that information if that's necessary. It can absolutely kick you out of being eligible for the grant if you have not conducted that a sufficient assessment or if it's not going to be ready by the deadline. So that's really important. And this time around, they wanted the applicant to actually verify that this was in fact the case. So we're happy to help you with that too, or also, of course, your friends at the DEP. Again, for cleanup grants, you have to have what's called the APCA, or the Draft Analysis of Brownfields Cleanup Alternatives. So you need to make sure that you have a plan for that, or you will, make sure that you can be well on your way to that. And EPA does have examples of that. And that's a critical document when you're looking to apply for a cleanup grant. And again, EPA or TAB can help you with clarification on that. Public notice, public meeting, and public comment period are required before the application is submitted. Obviously, you cannot do that now, but we just want to put that bug in your ear so that you make sure that you don't forget, because that can absolutely will actually take you out of the running if you did not meet the deadline requirements for when to give that notice and hold the public meeting. And have you confirmed that the site is eligible for EPA Brownfields funding? That's critical too. I do also remember John talking about, have you had that all appropriate inquiry conducted on that site, and was it within the time frame? So there's an expiration date on that AAI or the phase 1 environmental site assessment. That will absolutely take you out of the running. So please, let's do the homework on that. Next slide, please. RLF grant applications. Things you can do now, including to prepare a team that make sure you have someone on the team that can select those borrowers or the subgrantees. Make sure you have a plan for structure and administer of the subawards and the administration of the subawards. I can't speak right now. Facilitate the financial underwriting. So you need to make sure all this is in place right now, because that is that's just the nature of the RLF grants. Do you have a marketing strategy to help find potential applicants so that you can make this grant work and keep it actually revolving? And have any applicants already indicated that they may be interested in this? That would be good for, again, knowing that you have some entities that you can actually provide the grants to, the subgrants to. And you need to make sure that you have at least one team member who has experience with the lending practices to make sure that they can set this so that you can set this grant up in order to keep it alive and revolving for quite some period of time, because an RLF grant is a very long time commitment. So you need to make sure that, again, you have folks on your team who can help you do that and be prepared to do so for a long time. Next slide. And we're here to help. So some of the ways that TAB can help for assessment grants: we can help you when it comes to identifying the target area, help you with community engagement, budget assistance, again, actually coming up with a pretty realistic budget. And then we also have some templates and examples of grant applications that we can provide you with. For cleanup grant applications, we can work with you to make sure your site is eligible and have discussions about property ownership. Again, we can assist more with community engagement and public notice when that time comes. We can help get you ready to move forward with that ABCA, and then we can also help to identify leverage funds.